We're starting again. We're going back to the beginning of the Perek, Arvei Pesachim. Just again, as an introduction to the Perek. In reality, this is the second Masechta. There's Pesach 1 and Pesach 2. We call it Pesachim, 2 Pesachs. But the first 9 Perakim were one section, otherwise known as Pesach Sheni. And this is Pesach. This is our Pesach. This entire Perek is essentially what we do today. You'll notice the Perek is called Arvei Pesachim, yet the Mishnah starts off with the words Erev Pesachim. And Taisvus jumps immediately on it. And Taisvus on the right-hand corner says, Igar Sinan Arvei Nicha. If you want to say Arvei, it's okay. The Igar Sinan Erev. If you want to say Erev, it's okay. Hachi Kamar Erev Sheshaychtem by Pesachim. The Erev, the Eve, that we slaughter a lot of Pesachim. Inami, or Erev Pesach Rishon V'Sheni. Both. Okay? So that's where we take off here. So Erev Pesachim, on the day before Pesach, on the eve of Pesach, Samoch LeMincha, close to Mincha. So the Rashbam, and there again on the left-hand side, you'll see the top section is Rashi, and then it says in the middle, Pirush Rabbeinu Shmuel Talmud Rashi. The Pirush of Rabbeinu Shmuel, the student of Rashi. In fact, he was more than the student of Rashi. The Rashbam was a grandson of Rashi. He was a grandson of Rashi. So what's going on here is that we're not sure that the Rashi that we have in Arvei Pesachim is really Rashi. Many times in Shas, you're going to see this, that in place of this, you'll end up with the Pirush of the Rashbam. The one notable difference is that Rashi is always short and sweet. The Rashbam is always a lot bigger than Rashi, which will have the effect that our dafim are going to be a lot shorter for a good chunk of this Perek, because the Rashbam is going to take up a lot of space. But in this case, we're going to focus on the Rashbam. Samoch lemincha, just take a look at the Rashbam. Mincha ketana koidim lemincha ma'at chatzi shah betchila shah asiris. There are 2 kinds of minchas. We can start davening mincha. Assume a day is a 12-hour day, 6 hours for the morning period and 6 hours for the afternoon. Noon is at exactly 6 hours. That would mean that at 6.5 hours, that means a half hour into the 7th hour, begins mincha gedolah. And in yeshivas, they like to daven at mincha gedolah. But we, the rest of the world, hinge on mincha ketana, the small mincha, which is 3.5 hours into the afternoon, otherwise known as 9.5 hours into the day. Says our Mishnah, Samoch lemincha, that means 9 hours, not 9.5 hours, but 9 hours into the day, lo yochel adam, a person should stop eating until it gets dark, until it says that the stars come out. What does it mean they shouldn't eat? They shouldn't eat, meaning a meal. You shall, and listen to the words that I'm using over here, you shall not start a meal later from 9 hours and on. I'm underlining that word, start, because the Gemara all the way at the end is going to come to that conclusion that that's what this means. But what you're allowed to do is snack on fruits and other things like that. There's a machlokes whether you are even allowed to have matzah shira, rich man's bread, i.e. bread that was kneaded with fruit juices as opposed to water. We actually hold mostly we do not. If you looked at your chat yesterday, the Boca Walker chat, you saw that Marcel Winkler pointed out that the Magen Avraham says it's okay, you could eat matzah shira on Erev Pesach, but we are noyig not to do that, to eat, and we do not even eat egg matzahs on Erev Pesach. Lo yochel adam until it gets dark, until Pesach the coming out of the stars. Now that we've gotten to the evening, says the Mishnah, Afilu ani shebi Yisrael, even a poor person in Klal Yisrael, lo yochel ad sheyosef, is not allowed to eat when Pesach begins, actually from Erev Pesach in the afternoon and onwards, ad sheyosef, until he leans. Because in the times, especially in the Ottoman Empire, which is to say in the East, in the Muslim world, as it were today, but this was of course before the Muslim world, but the idea being they sat on low couches and they leaned, the sheiks and the pashas and the sultans all leaned when they ate. So leaning is a sign of cherus. It's a sign of being a free person. And if there's anything underlying the entire Pesach, it's the idea of freedom. And a poor person needs to know that he too is free, even though he's dependent, and a dependent doesn't always feel free. The answer is you're still free. And says the Gemara Mishnah Baita, and they, i.e. the Gabei Tzedakah, the guys who are the administrators of the Tzedakah fund, when they're giving out money for the ani to help buy the stuff for Pesach, must include enough to give them as much, nothing less than 4 cups of wine. For the Arba Kaisis, go up to Rashi now. Rashi, the top 4 lines from the top. Arba Kaisis.
The Rashbam.
Well, the Rashi. Go look at the Rashi. The Rashi. Keneged Arba L'Shayni Geula, because the 4 kaises are against the 4 expressions of Geula, of redemption. Ha'urim Begolus Mitzrayim, that says regarding the Golus Mitzrayim. V'hoitzesi eschem, v'hitzalti eschem, v'ga'alti eschem, v'lakachti eschem, v'parshas ve'era, that was said in Parshas Ve'era. The 4 different language expressions of freedom that were expressed in Parshas Ve'era regarding the going out from Egypt. So therefore, each kais, each cup of wine, is connected against one of those four expressions of freedom. Therefore, the ani must be given money from the fund, from the charity fund, to cover the 4 cups of wine. Va'afilu min hatamchoi, and even from the tamchoi, 99b2, even if it's supported from the charity plate. What does that mean, the charity plate? That means he's an ani sheba'aniyim. He's so poor. Usually this was the beggars, the traveling beggars that were in the town today and gone tomorrow, who really, really had nothing. So they would prepare specifically for them plates of food. In Borough Park, there's a shul called Shomer Shabbos on 13th Avenue. In its basement, they have laid out food on a 24/7 basis for anybody who needs to come eat. And there are people that do, and that's how they feed themselves every single day. This is the tamchoi. So even on the tamchoi, which is really, the bottom of the bottom, you still have to make sure that he gets enough for the 4 kaises. But back to the bottom again, to the Rashbam. But take a look at where right before it says Gemara. Right before it says Gemara, 1 line above that, it says, Im loy nosnu loy gabei tzedakah. But if the gabei tzedakahs, in other words, the administrators from the tzedakahs do not give this ani enough to get 4 cups of wine, Yimkar es malbusha, he has to sell his clothes, or yilva, or he has to borrow the money, or yisachir es atzmai, or has to rent himself out, bishvil yayin la'arba kaisis, in order to get wine for the 4 cups of wine, for the arba kaisis. And why are they making such a big deal about this? Because the 4 cups of kaisis are not brought in the Torah. They're simply learned out by the Rabbanon as an asmachta, as a connection to the 4 languages of freedom that are mentioned in Parshas Ve'era. Says the Mishnah, the entire purpose of Pesach, with all its mitzvahs and everything, is to engrave in us the absolute beauty of freedom. And it doesn't matter who you are and what stratus you're holding in Klal Yisrael, you are a free man. Now, obviously, when we look at freedom, I want to just again say a great line from Rabbi Sachs in the great book, The Great Partnerships, Religion, Science, and the Search for Meaning. He said, every living thing desires. That's a given. He said, only a human being can look at their desires and make a judgment call and say, no, even though I desire this, I will not do it. Says Rabbi Sachs, that's freedom. The freedom to say no, the freedom to choose the derech that you're going to do. Freedom is not simply following your desires. That's a given. Everybody has desires and everybody wants to follow their desires. The ability to say no and to make a judgment call, that's freedom. And that's what we're talking about here. Says the Gemara. Something in Gemara. Says the Gemara, how did our Mishnah start? That Erev Pesach near Mincha, you shouldn't eat. A person shouldn't eat. Mashma, that it's only on Erev Pesach. But Erev Shabbos and Erev Yom Tov, that's not a problem. You can eat and have meals all day long on the eve of the Yom Tov and the eve of the Shabbos. Why does the Mishnah say specifically Erev Pesach, which implies that it's unique to Erev Pesach? The prohibition of eating, of having a meal, even starts on the eve of Shabbos and Yom Tov as well. The Tanya, because we learned, a person should not eat on Erev Shabbos or Erev Yom Tov from Mincha and onwards. Everybody look at the bottom Tosfos, the last line of Tosfos, all the way on the bottom. Min ha-mincha lamala. Hashta, right now the Gemara is saying, Sal kedatach, I think the lav dafka min ha-mincha, from 9.5 hours and on, elahu adin sabuch lemincha. It really means at this moment in time, sabuch lemincha, like our Mishnah says, near 9.5 hours, i.e. from 9 hours on, you shalln't eat Erev Shabbos and Erev Yom Tov. Why? Says back to the Gemara, so that he should get to Shabbos when he has an appetite. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yosi says, nah, you can eat away until it's dark. I don't got a problem with this. Since our Mishnah clearly says that Erev Pesach Samuch Lemincha, by 9 hours in the afternoon you're not allowed to eat. Our Mishnah must be Rabbi Yehuda. But if that's the case, our Rabbi Yehuda holds that same din by Erev Shabbos and Erev Yom Tov. So why does our Mishnah only say Erev Pesachim? It should say Erev Shabbos, Erev Kol HaRegolim, and at the eve of all the festivals, you're not allowed to eat Samuch Lemincha. Comes the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rav Huna, Lo Tzricha Rabbi Yosi. The truth is, we needed to bring down Erev Pesachim because of Rabbi Yosi. The Rabbi Yosi says, that on Shabbos and Yom Tov, Erev Shabbos and Erev Yom Tov, the eve of Shabbos and the eve of the festivals, you're allowed to eat and keep on eating until it's dark. Our Mishnah is coming to teach us that Rabbi Yosi says that you're allowed to keep on eating until the dark, even on Erev Yom Tov or Erev Shabbos on the eve. That's only by Shabbos and Yom Tov. Erev Pesach, Erev HaPesach, but on the eve of the Pesach, Mishum dechuva de matzah, because there's a chiyuv to eat matzah. There's an obligation to eat matzah on the first night of Pesach, because it says, Be'erev toichu matzahs, in the evening you shall eat matzahs. Moida Rabbi Yosi is moida, that even on Erev Pesach you're not allowed to eat a meal from 9 hours into the afternoon until the nighttime of the Seder. Now, why would it be that Shabbos and Yom Tov, Rabbi Yossi would say it's okay to eat all the way through? Because in fact, the chiyuv to eat a meal on Shabbos and Yom Tov is not a d'oraisa. It is not biblical in nature to eat the meals on Shabbos and Yom Tov. It's actually midivrei sofrim, from the words in Yeshaya, where it says, the pasuk says, it shall be a delight for you. It shall be a delight. Shabbos shall be a delight. And we make an asmachta. How do you delight in the Shabbos? By adding meals. By adding meals. It's a Tosfos actually in Kesubos Daf Zayin on the days that goes into it about afushe simcha. What does exactly mean? An additional amount of simcha. But the point is, Erev Pesach, where there's a chiyuv d'oraisa to eat, where the Torah goes out of its way to say, Be'erev toichlu matzos, in the evening you shall eat matzos. There, even Rabbi Yossi agrees, therefore you should eat with an appetite. So no eating from 9 hours in the afternoon and onwards, from 3 o'clock in the afternoon and onwards. Mash'enken Shabbos and Yom Tov, which is only an asmachta from a divrei sofrim. It's not a d'oraisa. It's not biblical. It only comes from it's only from the prophets, from Yeshaya, where he says Shabbos should be a delight, and the Rabbanon learn out from it. You should delight with meals. That's only rabbinical in nature. Rabbinical in nature, says Rabbi Yossi, it's okay. You can keep on right on eating into the Shabbos. And that's our Mishnah. So therefore, according to this understanding, our Mishnah is actually the Tana of our Mishnah is Rabbi Yossi. Rav Papa says, Afilu Tema Rabbi Yehuda. You could say our Mishnah is even the view of Rabbi Yehuda. If it's Rabbi Yehuda holds that Shabbos and Yom Tov, you're also not allowed to eat in the afternoon of the Erev. You're not Erev Shabbos and Erev Yom Tov. You're also not allowed to eat in the afternoon because you should come into Shabbos and Yom Tov with an appetite. So how come our Mishnah only says Arbi Pesachim? So he says like this. Oh, some Arbi Shabbos v'Yomim Tovim. What do you call over there by the eve of Shabbos and the holidays? Mina minchu l'malo hudas. The brisa means exactly as it says. From mincha and onwards, it's also to eat, to have a meal. From 9.5 hours, from 3:30 in the afternoon, it's also to eat. Samuch lemincha shari, but close to mincha, it is permitted to eat. Until 3:30, until 9.5 hours, you could. Avo be'erev ha-Pesach, but on the eve of Pesach, afilu samuch lemincha nami also 99b3, 99b3. But on erev Pesach, even close to the time of mincha, i.e., not 3:30, but even 3 o'clock in the afternoon, not 9.5 hours into the day, but 9 hours into the day. You have to stop eating. And again, it's for the same exact reason. Because be'erev taichlu matzos is a chiyuv d'oraisa. You have to be strict upon yourself. So the Gemara says, but is that a fact? Ube'erev Shabbos, samuch lemincha shari. So you're telling me that Rabbi Yehuda, that actually near samuch lemincha, close to mincha, that means at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he's still allowed to eat. Well, Tanya, we learned, Lo yochel odo be'erev Shabbos v'yomim tovim. A person shall not eat on erev Shabbos and erev Yom Tov miteisha shoyes ulamaylo, from 9 hours and on, from 3 o'clock and on. So you see that's samuch, because mincha ketana is really 9.5 hours, 3:30 in the afternoon. But this brayso clearly says miteisha shoyes ulamaylo, from 3 o'clock in the afternoon, from 9 hours into the day and on. So that he should enter Shabbos with an appetite. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So what do you see? That Rabbi Yehuda clearly, there's another brayso, but Rabbi Yehuda clearly says that even Erev Shabbos and Erev Yom Tov, The Isser of eating on the Erev starts at 3 o'clock in the afternoon at hour number 9. Who said that this second Baraisa is correct? Maybe it's a corrupted Baraisa. Now we're on today's daf. Kuf Amin Aleph, 100A1. Congratulations to all of us. We've made it to our first 100 dafim in our daf yomi. Amazing. Dilma mishabatuhu. Perhaps it's corrupted, and it should actually read, a person should not eat on the eve of Shabbos or Yom Tov from 9.5 hours and on, from Mincha Ketana and on. Amalei Merema B'Temer Reb Yema. Reb Yema, and some say it was Reb Yema who said to him, no, I'm telling you that Baraisa is perfectly good. I once came to a lecture of Reb Pinchas, the son of Reb Ami, become Tana, and a Tana stood up and was reading over the Baraises, and he said over the Baraisa exactly like this, that you shall not eat on Erev Shabbos and Erev Yom Tov from 9 hours and on, from 3 o'clock in the afternoon and on, the Kibur Minei, and Reb Pinchas accepted it, Ihachi Kasha, then it's a Kasha, because Rabbi, if we want to, Reb Papa wanted to say that, our Mishnah could even be Rabbi Yehuda, and that it's only Erev Pesach, that's Samuch LeMincha, from 9 hours, from 3 o'clock in the afternoon and on. Erev Pesach, you're not allowed to eat, but Erev Shabbos and Erev Yom Tov, you're allowed to eat until 9.5 hours, till 3:30. We have a Baraisa where Rabbi Yehuda clearly says, even Erev Shabbos and even Erev Yom Tov, you have to stop eating by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. If that's the case, why does our Mishnah only start with Arvei Pesachim? It should say Erev Arvei Shabbosais, the Arvei Regolim, the Erev Shabboses and the Erev of the festivals. You have to stop eating Samuch LeMincha from 9 o'clock. Says the Gemara, you're right. To the Rav Huna. We're going to go back to Rav Huna. And what did Rav Huna say? That our Mishnah is actually Rav Yosi. That on Erev Shabbos and Erev Yom Tov, which is only, there is no biblical command to eat. It's only learned out from the words of the prophets and derived by the Rabbanon. There you're allowed to eat all the way until it gets dark. But Erev Pesach, where there's a chiyuv to eat matzah, no, that's a different ballgame entirely. And therefore, even Rabbi Yossi would agree that you have to stop eating by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, by 9 hours into the day. So says the Gemara, is that a fact? But is Rav Huna's interpretation correct? Rabbi Yomi said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, and some say Rabbi Avu said in the name of Rabbi Yosi Bar Chanina, halacha ki Rabbi Yehuda be'erev Pesach. The halacha goes according to Rabbi Yehuda on Erev Pesach that you have to stop eating at 9 hours into the day at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The halacha ki Rabbi Yosi be'erev Shabbos. And the halacha goes like Rabbi Yossi in regard to the eve of Shabbos, that you can keep on eating all the way until Shabbos. The halacha ki Rabbi Yehuda be'erev Pesach. Now this statement that the halacha goes according to Rabbi Yehuda on Erev Pesach, that you have to stop eating at 3 o'clock in the afternoon at 9 hours into the day, means that Bechlal, the Polit Rabbi Yossi, but Rabbi Yossi is arguing in both cases. But Rav Huna said that Rabbi Yossi agrees that on Erev Pesach, because there's a mitzvah, biblical mitzvah of the Erev Toichlu Matzahs, in the eve you shall eat matzah, that Rabbi Yossi agrees that on Erev Pesach you have to stop eating at 9 hours. But you see from here it's not mashma that. Says the Gemara, Loi, halacha mechlal de pligi behapsaka. The halacha accords with Rabbi Yossi regarding Erev Pesach, because even according to Erev Pesach regarding interrupting the meal at nightfall. What are we talking about here? Remember, I started off with the word start the meal. What happens if you start the meal at 8.5 hours, at 2:30 in the afternoon? Now, both according to Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, you started the meal beforehand, we're not going to ask you to get up. The question is now, so now you're eating and you eat all the way to the nighttime. and Pesach arrives, or Shabbos arrives, what do you do? And that's where the Gemara is going to go. To show you this Lamaisa, we just had this. Friday was Purim. We all learned that you had to start your meal when? Before Chatzos. Before Chatzos. But we never learned about ending the meal. It turns out that by the Chassidim, by the Rebbes, they start their meal. And the meal goes on, and it goes on, and it goes on. And it bangs into Shabbos. And the question now is, what do you do? When does the Purim meal end? When does the Shabbos meal begin? And that's this Gemara that we're about to learn right now. Says the Gemara, the Tanya, Mapspeaking the Shabbosas. We interrupt the meal for the start of Shabbos at nightfall. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, what exactly does that mean that we interrupt? Okay, in other words, what he says is that if you started eating early at 2:30 in the afternoon, at 8.5 hours into the day, we don't stop you from eating. But what that means is you have to stop the meal. The nighttime comes, you have to stop the meal, remove the table, okay? In those days, everybody ate on individual little trays. So they remove the trays, and then you recite Birchas HaMazon. Then you go ahead and you do Kiddush. You then do Kiddush, and you bring back the table, and you continue, and you start your Shabbos meal. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, you eat all the way through that. If you started before 9 hours, you started at 8.5 hours at 2:30 in the afternoon. When you get to the nighttime, remove the table, or as we're going to see, everybody, in today's world, you cover the food. You take a challah cover, a challah tish, and you cover the food. As the Gemara is going to proceed to tell us. Okay? You then bench, take out a kais, make kiddush, uncover the food, and start the meal again. Now it stops being Purim's meal. It now becomes Shabbos's meal. It stopped becoming your Erev Pesach meal. Yeah, go ahead, Daddy.
And then go down Ma'ariv.
And then go down Ma'ariv month after the meal. Correct. Right. And you can go down Ma'ariv after the meal. Exactly. So, Rabbi Yosi,
that's according to Rabbi Yehuda.
This is according to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yosi, this is not good. Rabbi Yosi, we do not interrupt the meal as long as the meal began with permission, meaning it began at 8.5 hours, 2:30 in the afternoon. You continue with the meal. It gets to nighttime. It's Shabbos. Keep right on eating. At which point, this is what you'll do. You finish eating, you'll bench, you'll do Birchas HaMazon, and then you make Kiddush.
And then you go down.
You're all going to jump over me. You all learned the halacha, Kiddush b'makam suda, having a Kiddush at the place of your meal, right? We all heard this. We're about to learn that topic. Exactly. This machlokes is clearly Rabbi Yehuda, who says you have to remove the table, bench, make Kiddush, and bring back the meal. And Rabbi Yosi saying, no, you can continue right on. You switch your songs. Oh, you were singing by Yibi Mei, now you switch, and now you do Shalom Aleichem, right? And that's it, and you keep right on eating. You finish, you bench, you take away the table, and now you make Kiddush. And obviously, we're coming to the machlokes. The great machlokes is, do you have to do Kiddush b'makom suda, or no, you don't have to do Kiddush b'makom suda? And what exactly is a Suda meal? Because obviously if you're in shul and after shul there's a kiddush. If you all remember before Corona, we used to have kiddushin in shul, right? At least in Florida, in Brooklyn, we're still making kiddushin in shul, but that's a different story, right? So the point was that doesn't matter. That's considered enough as long as you made a mezainis. You ate a mezainis, as we're going to see from this Gemara. So says the Gemara. Here we go. Maisa. Now there was a story with Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, with Rabbi Yehuda, with Rabbi Yosi. There was a story with Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosi. Okay, everybody was there. We're now on 108.2, heading to the bottom of the Yomid. They were reclining, they were dining in Akko, the Kaddish Shalem Hayoim, and the day became holy to them. So in other words, it was Erev Shabbos, and they were having a meal, and they started this meal at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, not 3 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And they kept right on eating and eating and eating and eating, and Shabbos came in the middle of the meal. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabbi Yosi. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said to Rabbi Yosi, and he gave him the unbelievable title of Biribi, the great of the generation, the great one of the Rebbe of the generation. This is the way they called somebody, the Godel Ador, the great one of the generation. Was in those days they would call him Biribi. Biribi with Sointcha Napsik. Do you wish us to interrupt the meal, take away the table, say Birchas Hamazon, and then make Kiddush, and then bring back the table in order to show, to have respect for the view of Rabbi Yehuda, our colleague who's here, who's sitting with us? Amalai, said Rabbi Yosi, every day you cherish my words in the presence of Rabbi Yehuda. You tell Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosi said this, and Rabbi Yosi said that. And now you want to cherish the words of Rabbi Yehuda in my presence. And like Achashverosh said when Haman fell on the couch of Esther. What do you want to capture the queen while I'm in the house? You all understand what was going on there. The whole story was, that's exactly right. The way that, if you really underline the story, was the hubris of Haman over those few days. Achashverosh was actually couldn't believe that he was being invited to these meals with Esther. What was going on? What did Esther have to do with Haman? Right? Haman shows up to the king in the middle of the night. Right? The whole thing. In other words, you can picture what was going, the conspiracy theories that were going on in Achashverosh's head. Esther set up the story beautifully. Amalai, said Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Im kain loy napsik. If so, we will not interrupt the meal. Shema yiru ha-talmidim v'yikvu halacha l'doros, because perhaps the talmidim, the students, will see us acting according to Rabbi Yehuda and not realize that we're just having respect for Rabbi Yehuda, that he's sitting with us, and they will erroneously establish the halacha according to Rabbi Yehuda for future generations. In Amru, they said, Lo zozu misham, they did not move from there, ad shekavu halacha ki Rabbi Yosi, until they established the halacha like Rabbi Yosi, that no, if you start the meal Erev Shabbos v'Yom Tov in time, that means at 8.5 hours, not at 9, keep right on eating, and keep on eating, and just switch your songs from Purim songs to Shabbos songs. Finish your meal, bench, and then make Kiddush. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mashmuel, but Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mashmuel, in fact, ein halacha like Rabbi Yehuda, but like Rabbi Yosi. In fact, the halacha does not go according to Rabbi Yehuda, that what you interrupt the meal, you bench, you make Kiddush and restart the meal, and it doesn't go according to Rabbi Yosi that you go all the way to the end, you bench and you finish the meal and then you make Kiddush. Elo, and this is famous because this is what we do. Poires mapa umekadesh. that when the nighttime falls during the meal, one says a mappa, a challah cover, a challah decal, a cloth over the food of the table, and recites Kiddush, and then continues. So, number one, there's a few reasons for this. Number one, of course, that is your hecker. That is your break. By putting a cover over it, you're breaking. The second thing is, because you're making Kiddush before the eating of the food, we don't want to embarrass the food. That's one of the reasons. Because you have two mitzvahs over here, the mitzvah to make Kiddush and the mitzvah to wash on bread, and you're doing the Kiddush before the bread. One of the reasons why we cover over the bread is that you're making a, what do you call it?
Kiddush on wine.
You're making a, what do you call it? You're making a bracha on the wine before the bread. That, by the way, is the same reason we cover over the shofars. You know, on Rosh Hashanah, we have the shofars, and they're just laying there. We always cover them. Where is the covering? As a matter of respect, because we're doing so many things beforehand, and we're even making brachas before them. Lishmoya kol shofar, not litkoya, not to blow the shofar, to hear the shofar. So as respect of the shofar, we cover them up. So says the Gemara, Aini, is this true that it's spreading over a cloth over the food and reciting Kiddush is enough? But says Rav Tachlifa in the name of Shmuel, Keshem shemapsikim the Kiddush, just like we interrupt the meal for Kiddush, right? We stop the meal, and now that Shabbos has arrived, in order to make Kiddush, we're now on 100B1, we're on Amud Beis, Kach mapsikim la'Abdollah. So too, we interrupt the meal for Abdullah. In other words, right? What does that mean? That means we're eating Shalosh Shudas, and it goes into Ma'ariv. We can make Abdullah right there, and we interrupt the meal. My mafsikin. What does it mean that we remove, we mafsik, we make a hefsik with the meal? Lav la kira shulchan. Doesn't it mean that we remove the table and recite Birchas Hamazon and then do Abdullah? Says the Gemara, live, no, lemapa. You put a covering on it. You eat Shalosh Shudas. Then it's time to make, it comes nighttime. You cover it over, and you go ahead and you make Abdullah. And now your meal went from Shalosh Shudas and became your Malav Malka. Right after Abdullah, you're killing two birds with one stone, and you only get to do one Birchas Hamazon without Ritzei, I would add. Without Ritzei. Okay? Says the Gemara, Rab bar Rav Huna, Ikla lebei Reish Galusa. Rab bar Rav Huna visited the house of the Reish Galusa. Remember, the Reish Galusa was after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, was sort of the prince. He was the person that represented us in the government. Aisu, and he came from the house of Hillel, who came from the house of David HaMelech. Aisu tabakame. When they came home from shul on Friday night to eat the Shabbos meal, they brought the table. The table, in other words, the table was completely set with everything on the table, including the chalas, like we do prior to Kiddush. Paras mapa, he covered a cloth over the bread. In other words, he put a challah cover over the challah. V'kiddush, and made Kiddush, i.e. exactly what we do today. We have the table set, and we cover the challah, and we make Kiddush beforehand. Tani nami hachi, and we also learned in a brayso, the shavin, and they all agree, she'ein mavi'in es hashulchan elim kem Kiddush. We do not bring the table of the bread ladle table until he first says Kiddush. In other words, first he says Kiddush, and then we set the table, or then we bring in the trays, the imhevi. But if he did bring the table prior to Kiddush, he set the table before Kiddush, so the challah is already on the table. Pares mapa, you cover it with the challah cover, umekadesh, and you make Kiddush. Says the Gemara, Tanu Chada. One brisa says, Shavin she'ein maschilin, that there's a case where Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi agrees that you're not allowed to begin the meal. And there's another brayso that says Shavim mitchilin. That Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi agrees that you are allowed to begin the meal. The first brayso which teaches that they agree you're not allowed to begin a meal. Mishkachas le'erev haPesach. We're talking about on Erev Pesach, where even Rabbi Yossi agrees you're not allowed to begin a Suda, you're not allowed to start a Suda on Erev Pesach close to the time of Mincha, close to the time of 9.5 hours, close to the time of 3:30, i.e. you're not allowed to start from 3 o'clock in the afternoon, from the start of the 9th hour. The second brayso that teaches when that they agree that you are allowed to begin a meal, name of the Erev Shabbos. But if you say that that's talking about an Erev Shabbos, and that both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi agrees that you're allowed to begin a meal on Erev Shabbos, what are you talking about? Before we said there was an argument. Rabbi Yehuda said you're not allowed to, and Rabbi Yossi said you can keep right on eating. Like Kasha, like we explained the whole time. Kan kodim tisha. The second brayso is we're talking about before the 9th hour, before 3 o'clock in the afternoon, at 2:30 in the afternoon, at 8.5 hours, both Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda agree that it's permitted to begin a meal on Erev Shabbos and festivals before the 9th hour, even on Erev Pesach. You're allowed to. Kan la'achatisha. But the other one where it says Rabbi Yehuda is arguing, and that you're not allowed to begin a meal on Erev Shabbos and Yom Tov, he's referring dafka from the 9th hour, near Mincha, from the 9th hour at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. There already he argues regarding Shabbos and festivals. And Rabbi Yossi himself would agree that with Erev Pesach, there I agree with you, since there's a mitzvah d'oraisa, there's a mitzvah biblical command. Of Erev Teichu Matzos, of in the evening you should eat matzah. Even Rabbi Yossi would agree on Erev Pesach from the 9th hour and on you're not allowed. But before that, at 8.5 hours, at 2:30 in the afternoon, both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi would agree that you can begin your meal. You're allowed to continue your meal. Very good. This is where we're stopping. We're on the daf. We're up to Ois b'nei Adam she'ikidushu b'beis haKnesses.